Bob Stewart there told me that the Taiwanese have the right to the UN's principle of self-determination. However, Beijing says that the future of Taiwan will be decided by the Chinese on either side of the strait, the 1.3 billion Chinese. What do you say to that?
Right. Well, what the Chinese government said is what the Beijing government think about it. But I think one really should actually look into the UN principle of the self-determination. It's a self-determination of the population of the area, that is Taiwan. So what we should actually listen to and to be decided by, it's Taiwanese people's determination to be them own or to be back to China. So it's more important. And I think it's actually the key issue of how Taiwanese people think. And that should answer the question of the self-determination principle.
Could you tell us about the reaction in the UK to Emmanuel Macron, the French president's trip to China, and especially his comments about Taiwan?
It is very interesting that back home in the UK, there hasn't been much of the comments of Macron's trip to China. I personally, I would suggest that it's because of Macron's trip actually overlapped with Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen's trip to Central Americans and then stop over in New York and California.
So were you surprised at all that there wasn't more coverage of it?
My perspective is, if that is an indication of the Brexit, why we would take much of the care of the French president said about that. It's more about what UK government would think of the Taiwan-China issue.
And going to the Simon McCarthy meeting and Tsai Ing-wen's trips to the US and transits, how was this portrayed in the British media?
To be cautious and precise, I would say that it's a neutral but slightly supportive to Taiwan. You can see the in-between underlying supportive of the UK media in that sense, to see China as aggressive power, to treat Taiwan as a self-ruled island, democratic island of their security. So that's what I can see. And actually, the coverage was quite large.
America obviously has turned really quite anti-China from the surveys, for example, a recent Pew survey. So in the UK, there isn't so much this wholesale support of, I guess, democracies, the Taiwan democracy against China's communism.
Yes, that's indeed the case. Actually, in my observation, that the US, I use the word awareness of the China-Taiwan tension, has far ahead of the UK's awareness. I would suggest that it's also how US and UK to position themselves in the Pacific region. As you would be familiar with the previous president, not Trump, but Obama's Asia pivot, right? US has always been, apart from Trump, putting Asia as the key or the main area of their key security interest. And the US withdrawal from Afghanistan was to concentrate their force to prepare the potential tension of China. So in many ways, that US actually put China as their priority. And then associatedly, Taiwan's understanding the initiative of the tilt in Indo-Pacific region. And China-Taiwan tension is the key in the Indo-Pacific stability in that view. But the understanding and supportive of the Taiwan democracy, I think it has a greater space to be improved in the UK as a whole.
For the UK, there was the release of the integrated review, refresh. I believe that was in March, and they mentioned Taiwan for the first time, and also described China as an epoch-defining challenge.
It's not just to talk about Taiwan, but also South China Sea disputes that was addressed in the integrated review refresh. So my understanding from reading of this very newly published governmental paper was to say that it's getting more of the understanding of the China-Taiwan, but that understanding still largely based on the concern and the fear of the rising China. It's important to understand better of Taiwan than to know what Taiwan is and can be supportive of. So I would say actually the UK's understanding of course, let's also again align with the geopolitical situation. UK's understanding of Ukraine has been lots higher than the understanding of Taiwan. Both are democracies, both are facing aggressive neighbors' threats. One has already been under war, one is very uncertain whether the aggressive neighbor will be using the military force.
How would you characterize the difference in approaches between the Rishi Sunak government administration and his predecessor, Liz Truss?
I still think that Liz Truss, their government was most vocal against China. That is true. Rishi Sunak continued as the predecessor Liz Truss government's vocal position against China, but in a way, probably less vocal, but doing more of the supportive action, hopefully, to support Taiwan. But I still would say that the overall government's understanding about Taiwan needs to boost it in that sense, because against China not necessarily means understanding Taiwan.
And you have mentioned that in terms of this understanding, trying to understand Taiwan, that you've been approached by some officials from the government?
Yes, that is also, well, I think that's it's due to because of the rising tension across the strait. So I've been approached by governmental officials from the FCDO Economic Directory or the Cabinet Office to ask the scholars' perspective about the cross-strait tension and issue. They wanted to know more about how do Taiwanese society see China, and how do Taiwan to position itself in terms of these potential threats. And in that sense, I think it is much encouraging signs to know that the government wants to know more about Taiwan.
How do you understand the UK's role in AUKUS, which is the Australian, UK, and US trilateral security partnership, given that, it's, as we discussed, it's not so hawkish on China as the US is?
That is core to the Indo-Pacific stability. Let's align with the UK government's policy and also their claim and the expectation. So that's one way. And another way is the government still not really so hawkish on China in the economic terms. So I can see the UK government is use this advantage of security-wise is very firm, determined, but economic-wise, we can see case by case in that sense. So one shouldn't really mix security hawkish with economic liberal situation with China.